On a bleak February morning in 1554, the air hung thick with dread inside the stone walls of the Tower of London. The ravens perched upon its battlements seemed to sense what was about to unfold, their black wings cutting against the pale winter sky. Below, a crowd gathered, their breath visible in the frigid air, murmuring with uneasy anticipation. At the heart of this grim theater stood a girl of just 17, slight of frame, pale as frost, her eyes fixed on the block where her young life would be severed. Her name was Lady Jane Grey, and though she had worn England's crown for no more than 9 fleeting days, her death would echo through history as one of its most haunting tragedies. This is not merely the story of a queen who lost her throne. It is the tale of a child prodigy, brilliant, obedient, manipulated, who was thrust onto a throne she never sought, only to be sacrificed on the altar of ambition and treachery. Behind her soft hands, behind her delicate features, lay a mind sharpened like a blade, schooled in philosophy and theology, in languages and scripture. But knowledge, in this world of daggers and crowns, would prove a curse. And what makes Jane's story truly chilling is not only her innocence nor the swiftness of her fall, but the cold precision with which others plotted her rise, knowing from the start that it would almost certainly lead to her death. To understand how a teenage girl came to kneel before the executioner's block, we must return to the year 1553, to an England teetering on the edge of collapse. The kingdom was a powder keg, its people divided between Catholic and Protestant, faith and heresy, salvation and damnation. The young King Edward VI, son of Henry VIII, lay dying at Greenwich Palace. His body, wasted by disease, had become a battlefield for religious dreams and political schemes. Edward, though only 15, was a zealot in his faith. He believed with unshakable certainty that to allow his Catholic half-sister, Mary Tudor, to inherit the crown would plunge England back into spiritual darkness. His conviction was so fierce, so fevered, that even as his body withered, he signed away the line of succession to place Jane Grey, his distant cousin, upon the throne. For Jane, the path to this fate began long before Edward's final breath. She was born into the powerful Grey family, her royal bloodline granting her proximity to the throne. From her earliest years, Jane's prodigious intelligence set her apart. She read Latin and Greek fluently by the age of 9, corresponded with scholars across Europe, and debated theology with men who were astonished at her grasp of Scripture. She was, by all accounts, a marvel. But in the Tudor world, brilliance was not a gift. It was a weapon, sharpened, wielded, and ultimately turned against her. Her parents saw her not as a child, but as an instrument of their own ambition. When her studies faltered, she endured punishments so harsh that she later confessed she had often wept with dread at the sight of her tutors. Knowledge became her shield, her means of earning approval, even as it chained her to obedience. This hunger to please, this fear of defiance, would make her the perfect pawn for men who dealt in power and blood. At the center of their schemes was John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, the most ruthless man in England. For years, he had ruled in Edward's name, his influence unchallenged, his enemies eliminated. He knew that if Mary Tudor took the crown, his own life would end on the scaffold. So, he devised a plan audacious enough to shake the very foundations of monarchy. He would place his own family upon the throne. The key was Jane Grey. Jane was forced into marriage with Northumberland's son, Guildford Dudley, in the spring of 1553. She had no choice, no voice in the matter. Eyewitnesses described her pale and tearful at the ceremony, more like a prisoner than a bride. Yet the union bound her fate to the Dudleys, sealing her role in the conspiracy that would soon erupt. When King Edward died that July, Jane was summoned to Sion House under false pretenses. There, surrounded by nobles and courtiers, she was told that she was now Queen of England. Her reaction was not joy, nor triumph. It was horror. Jane fell to the floor, protesting that the crown belonged to Mary Tudor by right. She pleaded, she argued, she refused, but the pressure was relentless, the threats unmistakable. For an hour she resisted, until at last, worn down by appeals to her faith and her duty, she consented. That moment, her reluctant assent, was her death sentence. On July 10th, Jane was proclaimed queen. But if Northumberland imagined the people would rally behind her, he was gravely mistaken. London's streets were silent. The common folk saw Mary Tudor as the rightful heir, and even many of the nobles who declared Jane's name did so with hesitation, secretly sending messages of loyalty to Mary. The air was thick with betrayal, and Jane, still a child, could sense it. And yet, in those 9 days, Jane showed a resilience and strength few expected. When her husband demanded to be crowned king, she refused, declaring that the crown was hers alone. When council members tried to desert the tower to raise troops in her name, she locked the gates and kept them prisoner. She carried herself with dignity, signing her proclamations, Jane the Queen, even as she must have felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Her brilliance, her discipline, her unwavering composure, it all shone through in those fleeting days. But brilliance cannot win armies, nor stop betrayal. For Mary Tudor had fled to East Anglia, gathering an army that swelled with each passing hour. Thousands flocked to her banner, not just Catholics, but Protestants too, who valued legitimacy over politics. By the time Northumberland marched to confront her, his men had melted away. His once mighty force dwindled to a handful of followers, while Mary commanded 20,000. The conspiracy collapsed in days, as if built on sand. Back in the tower, Jane waited. She knew the truth. She was a queen with no crown, a ruler with no realm. On July 19th, the Privy Council betrayed her. The same men who had sworn loyalty to her 9 days earlier now proclaimed Mary Tudor queen. Jane received the news with calm resignation, saying she was glad to relinquish the crown that had brought her nothing but grief. Outside her window, she watched her own father tear down the proclamations that had declared her queen, his hands shredding the paper as he cried loyalty to Mary. Her family, her allies, her very protectors, all had abandoned her. She was utterly alone. But the story does not end here, in the betrayal of a teenage queen, for the Tower of London would become her prison, her stage, and at last, her grave. And as Mary Tudor entered London in triumph, the fate of Lady Jane Grey hung by a thread balanced between mercy and death. The walls of the tower seemed to close in, the corridors whispering with secrets, the ravens circling overhead. For though Jane's crown had crumbled, her existence remained a threat, a living symbol to those who might yet rise against Mary. And as the shadows lengthened over that fortress of stone, the question became not whether Jane would die, but when. And when that answer came, it would be written in blood. The Tower of London, that vast fortress of stone and iron, had been Jane's palace for 9 days. Now it became her prison. The same apartments where she had received courtiers as queen were stripped of their splendor, their windows barred, their doors guarded. Jane, still only 17, moved from chamber to chamber, not as a monarch, but as a captive waiting for her fate to be decided. At first, Mary Tudor showed mercy. She saw Jane for what she truly was, a girl caught in the snares of ruthless men. Mary even arranged for Jane to be treated with comfort, lodging her in the gentleman jailer's house rather than the dank cells reserved for common prisoners. Jane kept to her routines of prayer and study, her books and her faith her only companions. Her letters from this period reveal a calmness that astonished even her jailers. She seemed to sense that her fate was no longer in her hands, and she bore it with quiet dignity. Guildford Dudley, her husband of convenience, was not so strong. Confined separately in the Beauchamp Tower, he fell into fits of rage and despair. Their marriage had never been one of love, but now their shared imprisonment created a strange, tragic bond. From her windows, Jane could sometimes glimpse him walking in the yard, pale and broken, and in those fleeting moments, their eyes met, two pawns bound together by a game they had never chosen to play. For a time, it seemed Jane might be spared. Mary was reluctant to spill the blood of one so young, and she recognized that Jane had been manipulated more than she had conspired. But in politics, mercy is fragile. In January of 1554, the rebellion of Sir Thomas Wyatt erupted against Mary's rule. Though Jane had played no part in it, her very existence was enough to give the rebels hope. They called her the rightful Protestant queen, rallying to her name as if she were still a living banner. And when her own father joined Wyatt's cause, Jane's fate was sealed. She was no longer simply a prisoner. She was a danger. Mary could not allow Jane to live. In February of 1554, Jane was brought to trial for high treason. The outcome was never in doubt. Before the judges, she stood small and solemn, her voice steady, her manner calm. She pleaded guilty. There was no other path open to her. But her composure struck all who watched. One observer wrote that she faced her sentence with a countenance more grave and sweet than had ever been seen. Her death was set. The days that followed were the last of her life, and they revealed the depth of her character more than any crown could have. Jane devoted herself to prayer and scripture, her faith unshaken, her intellect unclouded. She wrote a final letter to her younger sister Catherine, urging her to place her trust not in the fleeting glories of this world, but in God alone. Even in her final hours, Jane thought not of herself, but of those who would remain behind. On the morning of February 12th, the tower's bells tolled in sorrow. Jane was told that Guilford had already been executed on Tower Hill. She showed no outward grief, only a quiet resignation. Yet when she was led to the scaffold within the tower grounds, she saw his body being carried away. For the first time, her composure cracked. Witnesses wrote that she looked upon her husband's corpse with sorrow, but no tears. The scaffold was prepared upon Tower Green, the wood dark against the winter sky. A small crowd had gathered, officials, guards, a handful of witnesses. Jane ascended the steps with a calm that chilled all who watched. She stood before them, her voice clear, her words carefully chosen. She declared that she had never sought the crown, that she had been forced to accept it, and that she died a true Christian. She asked for forgiveness, both from God and from those gathered before her. And then, the most haunting moment of all, Jane blindfolded herself and reached for the block. But in her youth, in her innocence, she faltered. She could not find it. Panic rose in her voice as she cried out, "What shall I do? Where is it?" A guard gently guided her hand, and at last she laid her head upon the block. In that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The axe fell. 17 years old, 9 days a queen. Her life ended not with rebellion, not with defiance, but with the quiet dignity of a girl who had never wanted power, who had only wished to learn, to pray, to live. Jane Grey's death was more than the fall of a pawn in a ruthless game of politics. It was the extinguishing of one of England's brightest lights, a reminder of how innocence can be devoured by ambition. For centuries, her memory has haunted the Tower of London. Tourists and guards alike claim to feel her presence, an unseen watcher in the cold corridors, a faint weeping in the night, a pale figure drifting across Tower Green, where the scaffold once stood. Whether ghost or legend, her story endures, etched into stone and shadow, and perhaps that is why Lady Jane Grey's tragedy resonates so deeply, because behind the titles, behind the politics, behind the executioner's axe, was a teenage girl, bright, gentle, and brilliant, sacrificed for a crown she never wanted. It is here, in the silence after her final prayer, that we are left to wonder, what might England have become if she had been allowed to live? Would her learning, her compassion, her intellect have shaped a gentler age? Or was her fate always sealed the moment ambition placed a crown upon her head? Her ghostly story reminds us that power is never free. It is bought in blood, in betrayal, in lives cut short before their time. If you've been drawn into Jane's haunting tale, I invite you to subscribe, not just to hear more stories of history's shadows, but to keep alive the voices of those who were silenced too soon. Lady Jane Grey's execution was centuries ago, yet her story still lingers like a chill in the air, a reminder that history is not only written in ink, but in sorrow. And now, I leave you with one final question. Do you believe Jane Grey was truly a victim of others, ambition, or did her acceptance of the crown, however reluctant, seal her fate from the start? Share your thoughts below. For history is not just about the past, it is about the questions it leaves behind, questions that still haunt us today.